Hi guy, welcome back to TV Spoilers. Young and the Restless reveals the dramatic events of a thrilling escape from the police.
Young and the Restless Spoilers next week 9 to 13 that. The shockwave of Mariah Copeland's actions hit Genoa City like an earthquake with no end to its aftershocks. Her decision to take Dominic, Newman and Devon Hamilton's child was not perceived as a simple crime by those watching from a distance. It felt like a deep fracture in the city's already fragile sense of trust, because this time the villain wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. It was someone who had once been embraced, protected, and treated as family. What made it truly terrifying wasn't only what Mariah had done, but the growing realization that she no longer seemed capable of distinguishing right from wrong, reality from delusion, love from possession. Fresh out of a psychiatric facility, Mariah stepped back into the world carrying a fragility no one could accurately measure. On the surface, she could walk, speak, smile. She could look like someone trying to restart her life. But internally, everything had shifted out of alignment in a way that was difficult to undo, especially with Ian Ward's influence still clinging to her mind like an invisible grip. Ian didn't have to stand in front of her, didn't have to touch her to make her spiral. His presence lived inside her thoughts, turning fear into certainty, obsession into command. Mariah no longer trusted that she was choosing anything freely. She only felt that she had to do something, and Dominic became the center of that mission. In the distorted world Mariah created just to survive, she didn't see herself as a kidnapper. She believed she and Dominic were playing an elaborate game of hide-and-seek, a special adventure meant only for the two of them. That belief made her simultaneously exhilarated and desperate, because the more tightly she clung to it, the easier it became to avoid the truth. Abby and Devon were losing their minds with grief and terror, and the police were closing in. The more complex Mariah's game became in her head, the more brutal the real world grew, yet that brutality only made her more determined. She wasn't merely running away, she was racing against the collapse inside herself. Every siren in the distance, every lingering glance from a stranger, every vibration of her phone threatened to shatter her. Instead of stopping, she moved faster, as if speed could silence guilt. Dominic, trapped beside her, began this journey as a child pulled into a trip he didn't fully understand. But the longer it lasted, the more he sensed the wrongness through tiny details, Mariah's constant vigilance, her restless changes of route. The way she kept repeating that they were headed toward a surprise place with a forced brightness that didn't match her tense eyes. Dominic's impatience wasn't childish rebellion. It was the instinct of a child who could feel an adult's panic seeping into the air. Children are often more sensitive than adults realize. When grown-ups talk too much to cover fear, kids feel the atmosphere thicken like fog. And the more Mariah withheld, the more Dominic's curiosity became a pressure point, one that could crack everything wide open. The stop at a diner appeared, at first glance, like a moment of normalcy in a journey stretched taut with anxiety. A place to rest, to eat, to pretend they were simply tired travelers. But that very normalcy was dangerous, because it created opportunities for recognition, especially now that Abby had posted a desperate video online, begging the public for help. Abby's plea was not just a request, it was an admission of helplessness so raw she could no longer contain it. She had offered her pain to the world in exchange for the smallest chance that someone, somewhere, would spot Dominic, recognize Mariah, and call the police. That meant thousands of eyes were now searching. In a diner, all it took was one person connecting the dots. Dominic's question, quiet but persistent, finally surfaced once they were seated in a more private corner. He asked why Mariah wouldn't tell him where they were going. The question was simple, but it pierced Mariah like a needle, because answering it forced her to choose, keep painting the game in brighter colors, or face the reality that she was dragging him farther and farther from everything he knew. Mariah felt she had to give Dominic something special, a reason beautiful enough to erase his fear. It wasn't merely manipulation, it was her desperate need to be believed, to be seen as a protector rather than a thief. She insisted they were headed to the best hiding place in the world, as if dazzling words could transform flight into a vacation. Yet when she admitted she planned to take Dominic to an entirely different country, something in Dominic likely shifted. Suddenly the hide-and-seek game wasn't just big, it was real distance, real borders, a separation so massive it made his chest tighten. Dominic's fear emerged in the most honest way children express fear, through logic that is heartbreakingly simple. He insisted his parents would have an even harder time finding him if they went that far. It wasn't an accusation. It was instinct, his grasping for Abby and Devon, for home, for the familiar. And that instinct struck Mariah at the worst possible place, because it reminded her that Abby and Devon still lived inside Dominic's heart. That was where Mariah's true motive became clearer, even if she never spoke it aloud. She didn't just want to escape arrest, she wanted to become Dominic's mother instead of Abby. The thought may have started as a gentle fantasy, an aching wish to belong, to be needed, to matter. But with her mind already fractured and Ian Ward's shadow twisting her perceptions, that wish became possession. Mariah had no intention of returning Dominic to Genoa City. And if she truly believed he belonged with her, then soothing him wasn't only strategy, it was survival. What made the situation even darker was that Mariah may not have wanted to harm Dominic at all. She could sincerely believe she was giving him something better, safer, more devoted. But that warped sincerity was exactly what made her dangerous, because she wasn't operating with the self-awareness of someone knowingly doing evil. She was acting like someone convinced she was the hero. Meanwhile, Ian Ward's influence lingered like a poisonous whisper. He could suggest the most devastating manipulation of all, that Mariah tell Dominic his parents didn't want him anymore. Even the possibility of that lie thickened the air with dread, because it touched the deepest wound a child can carry: abandonment. Perhaps Mariah wasn't ready to cross that line yet. Somewhere inside her, a fragment of humanity still understood that those words would destroy Dominic. So instead, she chose a softer deception. She claimed the game was meant to be extremely challenging, that secrecy was part of the rules, and promised they would have fun. But the more she talked, the more it sounded like she was begging herself to believe it. She was building a future in her mind where she and Dominic would start over, where no one could take him from her, where she never had to return to the labels, the hospital walls, the world's suspicious stares. Dominic became her lifeline, the proof that she still had purpose. And when someone places their entire sense of existence on a child's shoulders, tragedy becomes almost inevitable. On the other side of the nightmare, Abby and Devon were being dragged through an emotional state that felt like constant suffocation. Every minute introduced a new fear. Dominic crying without comfort, Dominic hungry, Dominic cold, Dominic confused, Dominic carried too far away. Abby's decision to upload her pleading video was a final act of desperation. She let the world witness her pain because every ordinary resource had failed. The video turned the search into something bigger and more volatile. Any stranger could become either an extension of hope or the spark of catastrophe. And the risk Abby feared became real. In that diner, one glance could be enough. One person recognizing Mariah's face, one suspicious pause, one phone call to the police. Mariah couldn't control that uncertainty, so her instinct would tighten around her plan. Leave the country as quickly as possible, perhaps through Canada, before law enforcement sealed off the routes. The decision to cross borders wasn't merely tactical. It signaled that Mariah's inner restraints were dissolving. Once she crossed into another country, she could convince herself there was no turning back, that she had to keep going no matter what. Abby and Devon didn't hesitate. Alongside Detective Burrow and the police, they chased every lead, every tip, every possible sighting. Their coordination didn't feel like victory, it felt like a race against time, because time was the one enemy they couldn't intimidate. Devon's torment was sharpened by conflict, rage, fear, grief, and a brutal kind of betrayal. Mariah had once been close to them, someone they believed could love Dominic in a healthy way. Now that history turned into a blade, Devon understood the terrifying possibility that if Mariah's mind was truly slipping under Ian's influence, she could become unpredictable when cornered, and unpredictability was the worst threat to a child's safety. That was why the detail of Detective Burrow traveling with Abby and Devon by private plane mattered. It wasn't just action or spectacle, it was proof that the chase had escalated, shifting beyond Genoa City into something broader, more urgent, more dangerous. They were no longer searching nearby. They were tracking a trail that could lead straight to the edge of the country. A private plane meant speed, but it also meant pressure. If they guessed wrong, they wasted precious time. If they arrived too late, they lost Dominic. If they arrived too close, they might push Mariah into panic and trigger a disastrous reaction. Every option became a gamble with a child's life. As the situation tightened, Mariah and Dominic began to feel like they were trapped inside a sealed capsule, everything outside reduced to distant noise. Everything inside reeled by a psychological storm. Dominic's worry grew with every mile, even as he clung to Mariah because she was the only adult beside him. Mariah, meanwhile, fought to play the role of mother while wrestling the darkness in her head. She had to keep Dominic calm, keep herself calm, keep Ian's poisonous whispers from becoming commands. But the harder she tried to control the situation, the more her unraveling showed through. Tense eyes, rushed speech, secrecy turning into obsession. That's why the week of February 9th to 13th promised to push this storyline toward a breaking point. All the forces were converging. Mariah was moving closer to the decisive step of leaving the country, possibly toward Canada, convinced it was her only true escape. Abby and Devon were closing in fast, with Detective Burrow narrowing the distance. Dominic was the fragile center of it all, capable of triggering Mariah's panic with one honest question or one frightened reaction. And the public remained an unpredictable variable, armed with Abby's viral plea and the power to call law enforcement at the exact wrong moment. The closer Mariah got to the border, the less the question became whether she would be caught, and the more it became what she would do when she felt trapped. Because if Mariah truly believed Dominic belonged to her, then the thought of losing him could awaken the worst parts of her fractured mind. Ian Ward's presence could grow sharper, more aggressive, turning suggestion into command. Abby and Devon, no matter how fast they moved, might be forced into an impossible choice: rush in and risk spooking Mariah, or hold back and risk Dominic being taken even farther away. As the private plane lifted off, Abby stared down at the city shrinking beneath the clouds, her mind narrowed to a single heartbeat: Dominic. Devon clenched his jaw as if forcing himself not to break. Detective Burrow reviewed the latest lead one more time, because he understood there was no margin for error. And somewhere on a road stretching north, Mariah glanced at Dominic with an expression that was both tender and unstable, as if she saw her entire future inside him. Dominic looked out the window, the unease growing heavier with every mile, until one sounded a ringing phone in the diner. A stranger's gaze lingering too long made Mariah realize the game had been seen. In that instant, she made the most reckless decision yet: a sharp turn toward the border, a desperate attempt to beat Abby and Devon by minutes, because if she could pass just one checkpoint, Dominic would vanish from the life they knew, possibly forever. The audience can feel the next episode tightening like a knot long before the characters do, because the road has stopped being a road and started becoming a countdown. After hours of driving and rerouting, Mariah and Dominic finally pull into a modest restaurant to rest and eat, the kind of place that should have offered comfort through its ordinary warmth. Instead, the normalcy feels like a disguise that could tear at any second. Mariah chooses a booth tucked away from the main flow of traffic, not because she wants privacy in the casual sense, but because she needs to reduce the number of eyes that can land on Dominic's face and then jump with sudden recognition to everything circulating online. She keeps her shoulders angled inward, like a shield. Her gaze keeps moving, not resting long enough on anything to look calm. Every clink of a plate, every burst of laughter from another table, Every door opening and closing becomes a sound that tries to break into the fragile reality she has built around herself. Dominic tries to follow her cues at first, because children often do what they can to match the emotional temperature of the adult they trust in the moment. But the longer they sit, the more he feels the tension she's trying to hide. Mariah keeps bringing up the surprise place ahead with a brightness that doesn't fit the fatigue in her eyes. She repeats it the way someone repeats a prayer, not to persuade Dominic so much as to persuade herself that the next step will make everything feel better. Dominic's patience begins to thin, not because he is difficult, but because the secrecy itself has become a wall between them. The longer Mariah holds the answer back, the more Dominic's curiosity sharpens into a restless need to know. The game she keeps referencing is starting to feel less like a game to him and more like a rule he didn't agree to, a rule that keeps him in the dark while everything around them feels strange. When Dominic finally asks why she won't tell him where they're going, the question lands in the small booth like a heavy object dropped onto a table. It is simple, direct, almost innocent, but it forces Mariah to confront the cracks she has been plastering over with constant motion. For a heartbeat, she just stares at him, because she hears more than the words. She hears his growing uncertainty. She hears the invisible thread pulling him back toward Abby and Devon, toward home, toward the life she has decided he can't return to. She also hears the echo of Ian Ward's influence in the background of her mind, urging her to take control of the story before the story takes control of her. Mariah feels an urgent need to give Dominic something that will hold him close, something special, something that sounds like a gift rather than a theft. And that need is not only strategic. It is emotional, desperate, and tangled with a longing she barely dares to admit. The longing to be the person Dominic chooses, the person he depends on, the person he sees as his safe place. She leans in as if sharing a secret meant only for them and insists they are headed to the best hiding place in the world. The phrase is dramatic enough to make it sound like a child's fantasy, and she hopes it will do what fantasy often does, turn fear into excitement. But Dominic's eyes don't brighten the way she wants. They narrow, studying her because he can feel when someone is performing. He keeps pressing, and Mariah, cornered by his persistence, finally admits the truth she has been circling. They're going to a completely different country. The moment those words leave her mouth, she watches something shift in Dominic's expression, like a small door closing. The game suddenly becomes enormous, too enormous, because an other country isn't a playful concept. It is distance that cannot be walked back easily. It is a boundary that implies permanence. It is the kind of adult decision that makes a child realize, for the first time, that he doesn't control what happens to him. Dominic starts to worrying aloud in the way children do when worrying becomes too big to hold quietly. He points out that if they go that far, his parents will have a very hard time finding him. He doesn't say it to threaten Mariah. He says it like a fact, like a truth that should matter to her, because it matters to him. And that is where the emotional pressure inside Mariah begins to twist. She has been treating Abby and Devon as obstacles, people who will take Dominic away from her, yet Dominic treats them as anchors. His concern is not just about logistics. It is an instinctive declaration of who he belongs to in his own heart, even if he is too young to articulate it as such. For Mariah, that instinct feels like a threat. It exposes how fragile her control really is. It reminds her that Dominic's loyalty is not something she can command just by driving faster or hiding better. At the same time, Dominic's physical condition starts to deteriorate in ways Mariah cannot ignore. What began as travel fatigue becomes something heavier. His face loses color. He moves more slowly, as if every motion costs more than it should. His appetite fades, replaced by a quiet discomfort that makes him look down at his hands and then up at her with a faint confusion, as though he can't understand why his body feels wrong. Mariah tries to tell herself it's nothing, that he's simply tired, that once they reach the best hiding place, everything will settle. But denial doesn't stop the truth from rising. Each time Dominic shifts in his seat, each time he blinks longer than usual, Each time he presses his lips together as if holding back nausea, Mariah's panic grows. She isn't only running from the police anymore. She is running from the possibility that Dominic could become truly sick while in her custody, and that possibility threatens to tear her fantasy apart with brutal clarity. Mariah's mind responds the way it has been responding for too long, by tightening its grip on the story. She tells herself that staying the course is the only way to keep Dominic safe, that returning him to Abby and Devon is not an option, not now, not when she has come this far. Not when giving up would mean she has to face what she's done. She cannot allow the thought of surrender, because surrender would force her to recognize herself as the villain, and she cannot survive that recognition. So she turns to the only tool she has left, soothing Dominic with words, reshaping his fear into something she can manage. She promises fun. She promises that the challenge is part of the game. She promises that the secrecy is necessary because the game is designed to be extremely difficult. Every promise is meant to calm him, but it is also meant to keep him from pulling away emotionally. Mariah needs him close, not just physically, but psychologically. In the background of her mind, Ian Ward's influence continues to press against her. It is not always a clear voice. Sometimes it is a suggestion that arrives dressed as logic. Sometimes it is a dark shortcut that whispers itself into her thoughts and pretends it was always her idea. Ian's cruelest recommendation hovers like a poison she tries not to taste, that she may eventually tell Dominic his parents don't want him anymore. The fact that such a lie even exists as an option reveals how far Mariah has been dragged from stable ground. Yet even now, she doesn't fully embrace it. Not yet. There is a remaining part of her that understands it would fracture Dominic in a way he might never recover from. That part of her is small, trembling, but it is still there. So Mariah chooses a softer manipulation, instead insisting that Abby and Devon would understand later, that the game will make sense later, that everything will be fun once they arrive. She tries to keep her tone gentle, her face bright, but fear leaks out through the edges. Dominic feels it. That's what makes his silence more unnerving than tears would be. Outside the diner, the world is shifting because Abby has already shifted it. Her online plea is circulating, pushing Mariah's face and Dominic's name into the public eye with relentless momentum. It means any ordinary person, any waitress, any customer, anyone passing through could become the turning point simply by recognizing them and making a call. Mariah senses this even if she doesn't see the video in real time, because paranoia and truth are dangerously close when you are being hunted. She watches strangers too closely. She flinches when someone laughs loudly behind her. She keeps checking the door as if she expects police to walk in at any moment. And as Dominic's health worsens, her internal clock accelerates. She cannot linger. She cannot risk a hospital, because a hospital would ask questions, and questions would become handcuffs. The idea of Canada becomes more than a plan. It becomes an obsession, a line in her mind that separates capture from freedom. Canada is close enough to reach quickly, far enough to feel like an escape, and symbolic enough to convince her that once she crosses it, the game will reset on her terms. She starts to rush Dominic, not harshly, but insistently, coaxing him to move even when his body seems reluctant. She tells him they just need to get back on the road, that the next stop will be better, that he'll feel better once they're moving again. In her mind, motion equals safety. Stillness equals being found. She cannot afford stillness. She cannot afford to let Dominic's worsening condition slow her down, because slowing down feels like losing. Meanwhile, Abby and Devon are closing in with a different kind of momentum, the momentum of desperation sharpened into determination. Abby's grief has become an engine that won't shut off. She is no longer simply terrified, she is focused, the way a person becomes focused when fear has nowhere else to go. Devon carries his own storm, anger at Mariah, fear for Dominic, and annoying disbelief that someone they knew so well could do something so catastrophic. Yet disbelief doesn't stop action. The involvement of Detective Burrow makes it clear that the chase is escalating beyond local searching and into an urgent pursuit guided by leads that are tightening into a more coherent map. Every new tip, every possible sighting, every trace of movement becomes a thread they pull with trembling hands, hoping it will lead them straight to Dominic before Mariah crosses a line that can't be uncrossed. When it becomes clear that time is slipping through their fingers, the decision to board a private plane is not about luxury or drama. It is about speed, about cutting through distance the way panic cuts through reason. Abby understands the terrifying mathematics of this situation. If Mariah reaches the border first, Dominic's world fractures into a new shape, and every hour after that becomes exponentially harder. Devon understands something else equally frightening. Mariah's mental state may be unstable enough that if she feels cornered, she could make an impulsive choice that endangers Dominic even if she doesn't intend harm. The private plane is their attempt to remove as many variables as possible. But the truth is, the most dangerous variable is Mariah herself, and no plane can control what happens inside her mind when pressure peaks. Back in the diner, Mariah senses the invisible net tightening. She pays the bill too quickly, hands shaking slightly as she forces herself to appear normal. Dominic stands, sways for a second, then steadies himself with the edge of the booth. Mariah notices, and for an instant her face flickers with real fear, not of police, but of his body betraying them. She reaches for him, too firm, too protective, guiding him forward as if she can physically hold him together. Dominic's breathing is a little heavier now, his steps shorter. The road ahead is suddenly not just a route to Canada. It is a test of how long his body can keep up with Mariah's obsession. Outside, the sky feels colder, or perhaps it only feels that way because every breath is packed with dread. Mariah loads Dominic into the car with brisk efficiency. She scans the parking lot, catching a glimpse of someone staring a fraction too long, someone whose expression looks like recognition trying to become certainty. Her pulse spikes. She starts the engine, the tires bite the pavement. The car pulls out with a sharpness that betrays her urgency. Dominic turns his head, looking back at the diner as if part of him wants to stay there, as if the ordinary world inside it felt safer than the unknown ahead. Mariah misreads that look as resistance and immediately starts talking again, filling the space with reassurance, insisting that the hiding place is going to be amazing, that this is the hardest part, that soon they'll be somewhere no one can find them. As they drive, Dominic's condition continues to slide. He grows quieter. His eyes drift closed more often. Mariah keeps glancing at him, torn between fear and denial, between the instinct to turn around and the compulsion to keep going. She tells herself Abby and Devon will only ruin everything, that they will separate her from Dominic, that they will put her back into a system that never truly protected her. She tells herself she is saving him from something, even if she can't clearly name what. She tells herself love justifies risk. Yet with every mile, the truth becomes harder to suffocate. Dominic's body is not cooperating with her story. His weakness is becoming a loud contradiction. Then the outside world makes its move. A notification pings on someone's phone miles away. A tip is passed along. A timeline is mapped. And Abby's video continues to do its work like a beacon. The possibility that someone at the diner has recognized Mariah and called the police is no longer hypothetical. It becomes a looming certainty that Mariah can feel in her bones. She accelerates. She takes turns too quickly. Dominic shifts in his seat, wincing. Mariah tries to soften her driving for his sake, but fear keeps hijacking her hands. High above, Abby and Devon's private plane slices through the sky toward a lead that feels too sharp to ignore. Detective Burrow keeps his face controlled, but his mind is moving fast, stitching fragments into a pattern that points north, always north. Abby's hands are clenched, her eyes fixed forward as if staring hard enough could pull Dominic back to her. Devon's jaw is tight, his thoughts darkening with every imagined scenario of what Dominic might be enduring. They are all chasing the same disappearing point on the map, and none of them can be sure whether they are hours away from rescue or minutes away from tragedy. On the road, Mariah sees the first sign that the net may be closing, distant lights that might be nothing, a vehicle behind them that might be ordinary, a sense of being followed that might be paranoia or might be real. Her mind reacts instantly, feeding her worst interpretations, urging her to act before she is forced to react. Dominic stirs, murmurs that he doesn't feel well, and Mariah's stomach drops. For a moment she considers stopping, considers help, considers the impossible. But the fear of being caught collides with the fear of Dominic getting worse, and the collision produces a decision that is neither rational nor safe. She tells Dominic they're almost there, even though they keeps moving farther away. She insists he just needs to hold on a little longer, as if willpower can stabilize a failing body. The tension sharpens to a point as the landscape shifts toward the routes that lead to the border. Mariah's mind narrows until there is only one goal: Canada, Canada, Canada. Dominic's silence becomes heavier, his head leaning toward the window, his breathing shallow enough to make Mariah's hands tremble on the wheel. She keeps talking, but her voice is starting to crack. She keeps promising, but the promises are losing their shine. She keeps pretending the game is still fun, still controlled, still hers. Yet the truth is pressing in from every direction. Dominic is getting worse, Abby's plea has made them visible, and the chase is no longer distant. And just as Mariah's car merges onto a stretch of highway that will decide everything, her phone buzzes again, an unknown number, an alert. A sound that could mean the police are closer than she thinks. She glances down for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction of a second Dominic lets out a faint, strained sound that is more frightening than a cry. Mariah jerks her eyes back to the road, heart hammering, and realizes she is running out of time in two ways at once: time before the authorities catch her, and time before Dominic's body forces her to stop. The border sign appears in the distance like a promise and a threat, and Mariah grips the wheel as if she can squeeze fate into compliance, unaware that Abby and Devon's plane has just landed close enough for Detective Burrow to say, with chilling certainty, that the next move will either bring Dominic home or push Mariah into the kind of panic that makes people do the one thing they swore they'd never do. On our TV Spoilers channel, I always seek content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting perspectives. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.